A co-conspirator alleged that the defendant solicited nude photographs and videos of a minor.
Why would you say something like this? Talk about prejudicial.
The reason why he is back and was returned is because of an arrest warrant.
So you could always bring him back. That's good to know.
Constitutional crisis averted, day saved. It turns out the Trump administration could get him back whenever they wanted and they were just lying through their teeth. Except
I was going to make a joke, but you just said it, yeah. I thought we couldn't get this guy back. I thought he was lost forever.
that it seems, unfortunately, the Trump administration only brought him back to try him on some very serious federal charges.
Abrego Garcia has landed in the United States to face justice. On May 21st, a grand jury in the Middle District of Tennessee returned a sealed indictment charging Abrego Garcia with alien smuggling and conspiracy to commit alien smuggling in violation of Title 8 U.S.C. 1324.
Yes, after months of defying court orders and claiming they just couldn't possibly bring Kilmar back from an Salvadoran torture prison, now the Trump administration is proudly announcing Kilmar's return to U.S. soil so they can pursue human smuggling charges against him. And you know the charges are completely legit because they've rolled out the red carpet, done the media blitz proclaiming that Kilmar is, among other things, a human trafficker, an MS-13 gang member, and even a pedophile now. But this announcement, with its barrage of unproven smears, and we'll talk about that too, comes just in the nick of time for the administration, which was facing potential sanctions in a Maryland civil case filed by Kilmar and his family. Now, as you may recall, Kilmar Abrego Garcia was born in El Salvador. After being threatened for several years by the Barrio 18 gang, Kilmar fled his home country and joined his brother in Maryland. In 2019, he was picked up in an ice sting outside of a Hyattsville, Maryland Home Depot. Law enforcement claimed that an informant and identified Kilmar as a member of MS-13, but no actual charges were ever filed, and Kilmar's immigration proceedings resulted not in a deportation, but instead in a withholding of
How do you survive a plane crash? Just sit in seat 11A.
removal order, which, because he demonstrated a credible fear for his life, barred Kilmar's removal to El Salvador specifically. Now, after his release from immigration detention, Kilmar returned to his life in Maryland, had a child with his wife, helped his wife raise her two other children, and was employed as a sheet metal worker. But on March 12, 2025, Kilmar was driving home with his 5-year-old son when he was pulled over by immigration officers. They arrested him without explanation and threatened to have social services pick up his son if his wife didn't arrive within 10 minutes. Kilmar was then whisked off to ICE detention and, with no due process whatsoever, was sent for an indefinite stay in a torture prison in El Salvador, the very country a judge had expressly forbidden the U.S. government from sending him to. Kilmar's wife, Jennifer, had no idea where he was until someone sent her a picture of the inmates in El Salvador's notorious CICOT prison, and she recognized her husband in the photo. Now, as we talked about, CICOT has a well-documented history of human rights abuses, including torture, overcrowding, and death at the hands of guards and other inmates. Yet the Trump administration has putatively paid $6 million in a contract that no one has seen yet to El Salvador to house deportees, including many who had never been convicted of any crime, in CICOT under the watchful eye of Bukele, the dictator of El Salvador. Trump and Bukele both bragged about this arrangement on social media, on the news, and in fact, even in the White House.
How can I return him to the United States? Like, if I smuggle him into the United States, or whether I do it first, I'm not going to do it.
Trump even publicly raised the possibility of sending Americans, homegrowns as he called them, to CICOT.
We also have homegrown criminals that push people into subways, that hit elderly ladies on the back of the head with a baseball bat when they're not looking, that are absolute monsters. I'd like to include them in the group of people to get them out of the country.
And Bukele has seemed excited about the idea of getting paid to violate the rights of American citizens. Meanwhile, Abrego Garcia's wife, Jennifer, filed a suit against the Trump administration. In several court filings, the Trump administration admitted that it had sent Abrego Garcia to El Salvador in error, but the administration still refused to bring Kilmar back. After Maryland federal judge Paula Zenas granted a temporary restraining order directing the Trump administration to, quote, facilitate Kilmar's return, the Trump administration went on the offensive and resurrected a slew of unproven accusations that Abrego Garcia was a member of the MS-13 gang, and even went so far as to Photoshop a picture of Abrego Garcia's hand tattoos with clearly non-original lettering of MS-13. They touted some old restraining orders that his wife had filed against him, and most important here, they unearthed the story of a time he'd been pulled over by law enforcement in Tennessee and questioned because he was driving from Texas to Maryland with several other immigrants, and the administration used that stop to imply that Kilmar was a human trafficker. Now, some of those accusations may be true, but we can't be sure which ones because Kilmar was never tried in court. The government has never had to meet its burden of proof, and no judge or jury has ever considered the evidence and made a finding. The administration's accusations were just that, they were accusations, and without due process, there was no way to evaluate their veracity. But in addition to the PR, the Trump administration also appealed Judge Zenas' order to the Supreme Court, which issued a unanimous decision affirming that the administration had to, quote, facilitate Abrego Garcia's return to the United States. Though oddly, Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller apparently read an entirely different Supreme Court decision and declared this a victory for the White House.
In our favor.
In our favor, against the district court ruling, saying that no district court has the power to compel the foreign policy function of the United States.
And around the same time, Trump and Bukele, who had a meeting at the White House, had jaunty back and forth talking about how they couldn't possibly return Abrego Garcia to the United States.
The question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
But meanwhile, Judge Zenas was growing increasingly weary of these antics and ordered the administration to give regular status updates about what steps it was taking to facilitate Abrego Garcia's return. But the administration did not take this order.
What? Where is she from? I don't like this last name. It makes her seem like she's an alien. That X letter is a very spooky letter.
In order the administration.
What is the background? Where does this name come from? Zenas? She sounds like a Scientologist.
To give regular status updates about what steps it was taking to facilitate Abrego Garcia's return. But the administration did not take this order particularly seriously. The Trump administration filed a series of uninformative so-called status updates, which basically amounted to thumbing their noses at the court. But in response to this recalcitrance after a contentious hearing, the judge granted the plaintiff's request for expedited discovery. But not surprisingly, the administration immediately appealed, asking for a stay of the judge's discovery order. But the Court of Appeals denied the request for a stay, and the government was left in the uncomfortable position of having to provide Judge Zenas with evidence that it was complying with the law, which it seemed clear they were not. Meanwhile, Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen paid Abrego Garcia a visit in El Salvador. But after several characteristically anemic status reports, plaintiffs filed a motion claiming that the Trump administration wasn't engaging engaging in discovery in good faith. Defendants objected to plaintiff's discovery requests, arguing that the timeline for discovery was too fast. The discovery requests were based on the false premise that the United States can or has been ordered to facilitate Abrego Garcia's release from custody in El Salvador, and claiming that the material was privileged. But the judge wasn't having it and took the Trump administration to task for its continued non-compliance, stating that, quote, defendants and their counsel well know that the falsehood lies not in any supposed premise, but in their continued mischaracterization of the Supreme Court's order. Defendants' objection reflects a willful bad faith refusal to comply with discovery obligations. And she found the defendants' privilege claims equally specious and their complaints about the timeline unconvincing because, quote, for weeks defendants have sought refuge behind vague and unsubstantiated assertions of privilege, using them as a shield to obstruct discovery and evade compliance with this court's orders. But she directed plaintiffs to narrow their interrogatories and ordered defendants to actually answer. Now, over the next month, the parties continued to fight over the scope of discovery and the adequacy of the Trump administration's responses. But because of the administration's continual recalcitrance in this case, including, according to plaintiffs' discovery deficiencies...
We're recounting all of this. What is the point of this video? They're trying to charge him with a bunch of shit. I guess he gets to that eventually.
Consistent delays and refusal to reply properly to interrogatories, plaintiffs asked Judge Zenas permission to file a motion for sanctions. And on June 4th, after months of uncooperative behavior, the judge granted the plaintiffs permission to move forward with their motion for sanctions. Now, meanwhile, the Trump administration tried to get the entire lawsuit dismissed, claiming that Judge Zenas and the Maryland District Court lacked jurisdiction. While that motion to dismiss was still pending and plaintiffs were busy drafting their motion for sanctions, the Trump administration made the surprise announcement that, amazingly, Abrego Garcia had been returned to the United States. Now, if you've been renditioned to a foreign country and then inexplicably brought back to the United States only to face federal charges, you're probably going to want a good lawyer. But if you want a great lawyer, my law firm, the Eagle Team, can help. If you've got in a car crash...
Oh my God, is the Eagle Team defending him?
...suffered a data breach. And by the way, we don't get paid, team. This court apprised of everyone in a one-page notice filed with the court on June 6th. The Trump administration informed the court that, quote, on April 4th, 2025, this court ordered defendants to facilitate the return of plaintiff Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia to the United States. Defendants hereby provide notice that they have complied with the court's order and indeed have successfully facilitated Abrego Garcia's return. As the Attorney General recently announced, Abrego Garcia was returned to the United States today to stand trial on criminal charges in the Middle District of Tennessee. So the administration then argued that the judge's order should be dissolved and the entire case should be dismissed as moot. In the meantime, the administration requested a stay on all case proceedings, including discovery. So it turns out that despite the Trump administration's repeated protestations and statements to the court, they actually were capable of bringing Abrego Garcia back. Or as the plaintiffs put it in their June 8th motion asking the court to continue to allow discovery and potential sanctions, quote, two things are now crystal clear. First, the government has always had the ability to return Abrego Garcia, but it simply refused to do so. Second, the government has conducted a determined stalling campaign to stave off contempt sanctions long enough to concoct a politically face-saving exit from its own predicament. And obviously the face-saving exit the plaintiffs are referring to is the Trump administration's decision to bring Abrego Garcia back to the United States, but only after the Department of Justice had indicted him for charges relating to a 2022 traffic stop in Tennessee. So let's talk about that incident. Here's what we know so far. On December 1st, 2022, Abrego Garcia was pulled over for speeding in a vehicle with 8 passengers and told police that he had come from Texas several days earlier and were traveling to Maryland to do construction work. The police officers who stopped him speculated that he might be transporting people for money because there was no luggage in the vehicle, but they decided not to ticket or charge Abrego Garcia. Instead, they sent him on with a warning. And so it's this incident that appears to form the basis of the federal charges that have been filed against Abrego Garcia. And on June 6th, we finally learned what those were when the Trump Department of Justice asked for the unsealing of a shocking May 21st grand jury indictment against Abrego Garcia. So first a note on grand juries. A grand jury trial is not a regular criminal trial. It is, in most criminal cases, the precursor to a criminal trial, during which the prosecutor presents a group of randomly selected jurors with the prosecutor's potential arguments against a defendant. It's how the charges get formalized. In an actual criminal trial, the defendant would have an attorney, an opportunity to present witnesses and arguments in their defense, and the ability to confront the witnesses against them. But in a grand jury proceeding, the defendant and his attorneys cannot be present to refute or even hear the evidence or witness testimony. And grand juries can also consider evidence like hearsay that would not be admissible in a criminal trial. In a criminal trial, the prosecution must prove beyond reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty. And in a grand jury trial, the prosecutor must only prove that there is probable cause to believe that a crime has been committed and that the person being investigated was the person who committed it. And obviously, grand juries do not convict people. They simply recommend whether a prosecutor should launch a criminal trial against that person. And grand jury proceedings are not adversarial proceedings where both sides can present evidence. They are one-sided proceedings where only the prosecutor gets to present their case, which is why grand juries have often been criticized as a rubber stamp for prosecutors. But sometimes, as is the case here, a grand jury says there's not even enough evidence for one particular charge or others. And that acts as a sort of veto against the charges even before a case has been filed. And in this previously sealed grand jury indictment, the Department of Justice alleged that Abrego Garcia's 2022 trip through Tennessee was one of more than 100 human trafficking trips that Abrego Garcia made as part of a years-long conspiracy. Now, obviously, anytime we deal with an indictment, these are merely accusations from the government. They are so far unproven. But according to the government's filings in the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Tennessee, the government alleges from 2016 to 2025, Abrego Garcia conspired with several other unnamed non-citizens to transport thousands of undocumented immigrants from South and Central American countries into the United States. The government alleges that Abrego Garcia's co-conspirators helped the immigrants illegally cross the border into Texas. Then Abrego Garcia and other drivers were paid to transport the undocumented immigrants to other parts of the United States. And according to the indictment, both Abrego Garcia and many of the people he transported were members of the MS-13 gang. The government is also alleging that Abrego Garcia and his co-conspirators transported people, including children, in unsafe ways in makeshift seats and in the floors of vehicles, and that Abrego Garcia himself had abused some of the women he had transported. And the indictment also mentioned that one of Abrego Garcia's supposed co-conspirators was involved in a 2021 incident where a tractor trailer carrying migrants overturned in Mexico and caused more than...
I'm just curious, actually. Where is this indictment? Okay. From in or around 2016 through in or around 2025, Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia and others known and unknown to the grand jury conspired to bring undocumented aliens to the United States from countries such as Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Ecuador, and elsewhere, ultimately passing through Mexico. Before crossing into Texas, the co-conspirators knew the undocumented aliens did not possess authorization to enter the United States. This was issued from a U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Tennessee, which is where Legal Eagle said that he was being charged at. And then these are the 4 laws that they are charging him for infractions under. Garcia and co-conspirators from El Salvador, blah, 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 and elsewhere communicated with each other using cell phones and social media applications to facilitate the unlawful transportation of undocumented aliens. Garcia and co-conspirators collected financial payments from undocumented aliens for illegal transportation. Unnamed co-conspirators 1 through 5 were co-conspirators with Garcia, citizens of El Salvador. They were not U.S. citizens. Blah, blah. Citizen was also a member and associate of the transnational criminal organization La Mara Salvatrucha, also known and hereinafter referred to as MS-13. Criminal enterprise, Garcia, as detailed earlier, used his status in MS-13 to further his criminal activity over the course of the conspiracy. The co-conspirators knowingly and unfollowed transported thousands of undocumented aliens who had no authorization to be present in the U.S. Okay, count 1, conspiracy to transport aliens. Garcia did combine, conspire, confederate, and agree with co-conspirators 1 through 6 to knowingly and in reckless disregard of the fact that certain aliens had come to, enter, and remain in the U.S. in violation of transport and move said aliens within the U.S. by means of transportation, otherwise in further such violation of law, with intent to further the unlawful presence of the aliens in the U.S. for private financial gain in violation of Title 8. 1324. USC. Is this Title 8? Yeah, okay. I'm curious what this requires. A1A2. Any person who, knowing or in reckless disregard of the fact that an alien has come to, entered, or remains in the United States in violation of the law, transports or moves or attempts to transport or move such alien within the United States by means of transportation otherwise in furtherance of such violation of the law. Does this charge mean that if you drive somebody around who's an illegal immigrant, you're guilty of it? Is that what this means? Oof. Okay. A2 and B1. Any conveyance, including any vessel, vehicle, or aircraft that has been or is being used in the commission of a violation of subsection A, the gross proceeds of such violation and any property traceable to such conveyance or proceeds shall be seized and subject to forfeiture. Any conveyance. So like your car, basically, and any money earned has to be given back to the government or is seized. Okay. Spooky. Is that really a criminal charge? I'm just curious. If I have a person that I know in the United States, I know they're an undocumented person or an illegal immigrant, and I drive them around, could I be charged with this? Is this a crime you could be charged with? Or are there other elements here that I'm not aware of? Knowing or in reckless disregard of the fact that an alien has come to, entered, or remains in the U.S. in violation of law, transports or moves or attempts to transport or move such alien within the U.S. by means of transportation otherwise, in furtherance of such violation of the law, in furtherance of such violation, does that mean that you're moving them with the explicit purpose of just, like, I wonder what this part means here, what the case law, A2 and B1. I think I did read the wrong B1. It's this here, I think. The capitalization matters. Any person who violates subparagraph A for each alien in respect of such violation occurs in the case of violation of subparagraph A1 or occurs in which the offense was done for the purpose of commercial advantage or private financial gain. Be fine. Okay, yeah. This, I think, was the other one they were calling it. Agreed to work together to transport undocumented aliens for profit and private financial gain. How would they ever prove that you knew they were illegal? I mean, depending on what devices they have, I imagine that could be really easy, right? Like if you were illegal, somebody saying something along the lines of like, oh shit, like the cops are coming, like I got to get out, or like some stuff like that. I feel like that actually fairly easy to prove probably, right? Undocumented else would illegally cross the U.S. border. Garcia and CC1 ordinarily picked up the undocumented aliens in the Houston, Texas area shortly after the aliens had unlawfully crossed the southern border of the U.S. Garcia and CC1 then transported the undocumented aliens from Texas to other parts of the U.S. and to further aliens' unlawful presence in the U.S. Okay. So this is like coyote stuff, kind of. Yeah, Kafka. Technically, the recklessness there means that you wouldn't need to know, but you should know. But I feel like you could prove even a higher thing than reckless. I feel like that'd be pretty arbitrarily easy to prove. But my girlfriend's Mexican family openly talk about the illegals and coyotes they know. Yeah, I imagine it's probably people just, whatever. During the course of the conspiracy, CC1 was incarcerated for alien smuggling, was deported from the U.S. During that period. Occasionally and simultaneously transported firearms illegally purchased in Texas for distribution or resale in Maryland. Garcia occasionally simultaneously transported undocumented aliens and narcotics purchased in Texas for distribution and resale in Maryland. Sounds like they don't really put any evidence in the indictment. So, and they also include Garcia a lot with other co-conspirators. Like this is a pretty crazy one. Garcia, CC1, and CC2 transported undocumented aliens in an unsafe manner, including using reconfigured vehicles with aftermarket unattached seating rows, and they transported children on the floorboards of vehicles in order to maximize profits. But they're always including like other co-conspirators in these claims. This is about the traffic stop. Okay. Damn, this will be a crazy court case.
50 deaths. And based on these allegations, the government indicted Abrego Garcia on 2 counts from 8 U.S.C. 1324, a conspiracy to transport aliens and unlawful transportation of undocumented aliens. The first section creates criminal liability for anyone who, quote, knowing or in reckless disregard of the fact that an alien has come to, entered, or remains in the United States in violation of law, transports or moves or attempts to transport or move such alien within the United States by means of transportation or otherwise in furtherance of such violation of law. So to make its case, the DOJ will have to prove that Abrego Garcia transported or attempted to transport illegal aliens within the United States, and also that he either knew or recklessly disregarded the fact that they were in the United States illegally. Now, in the indictment, the government highlighted the fact that Abrego Garcia supposedly received compensation for this work, as Pam Bondi has claimed it was his, quote, full-time job. The DOJ is probably emphasizing the financial aspects of the accusations because under the law, if Abrego Garcia was financially compensated for transporting undocumented immigrants, that would allow the prosecution to pursue a stiffer sentence. Now, we don't yet know what evidence the government has in support of these allegations. We'll have to reserve judgment until we see that evidence. But I will say it is awfully convenient that they've suddenly found all of these horrendous accusations relating to the seemingly random guy that just became the flashpoint for this entire international snafu, which leads me to be more than a little skeptical about these accusations. Now, the Trump DOJ has also filed a motion for detention, asking the court to hold Abrego Garcia in pretrial custody instead of releasing him on bail pending trial. In support of that argument that Abrego Garcia is a danger to the community and should not be released, the government dropped a few more bombs in both its motion and Attorney General Pam Bondi's announcement, which are not part of the indictment, claiming that Abrego Garcia had also transported firearms and drugs, that he was responsible for the murder of a rival gang member's mother in El Salvador, and that he solicited naked pictures from a minor. But Abrego Garcia has not been indicted on either of those claims. No evidence has been offered to support them, and not even the grand...
Wait, was that in there? Wait, hold on, did I miss that? 1 second.
Pictures from a minor. Transported firearms, its motion, and Attorney General Pam Bondi's announcement, which are not part of the indictment, claiming that Abrego Garcia had also transported firearms.
Oh, this is like an announcement or something of the... Okay. If convicted at trial, the defendant faces maximum 10 years for each alien he transported accordingly. Sentence. The grand jury alleges, among other troubling facts, that defendant 1 smuggled thousands of undocumented aliens to the United States. 2 is a member and associate of MS-13, a foreign terrorist organization. 3 transported numerous transported children. Okay. Abused undocumented alien females under his control while transporting them through the United States and trafficked firearms and narcotics from Texas to Maryland on multiple occasions. The evidence the defendant committed the offenses charged in the indictment is overwhelming. Additional evidence that the government has uncovered as part of its investigation, discussed further below, regarding the defendant's past violence and attempted solicitation of child pornography. But that wasn't in the indictment. Okay.
And drugs, that he was responsible for the murder of a rival gang member's mother in El Salvador, and that he solicited naked pictures from a minor. But Abrego Garcia has not been indicted on either of those claims. No evidence has been offered to support them, and not even the grand jury considered them. Now, putting aside the salaciousness of these new allegations, it's worth mentioning just how unbelievably improper it is for the sitting attorney general to make these prejudicial statements about a criminal defendant who is actively being prosecuted by the Department of Justice. The Trump administration's campaign to smear Abrego Garcia in the media is itself a breach of norms and potentially prosecutorial ethics. In the past, federal, state, and local prosecutors from both political parties have generally only publicly accused defendants of crimes for which a grand jury indicted them. Discussing other potential crimes has long been regarded as an abuse of prosecutorial power, risking obvious unfair harm to defendants' reputations. And according to NBC News, a former senior Justice Department official who requested anonymity citing fears of retaliation said that Bondi often speaks as a partisan Trump loyalist, not as a neutral law enforcement.
Yeah, you don't say, huh?
An officer. Yeah, dude, we have TVs and eyes. We can see it. But additionally, according to an ABC News report, concerns about the Trump administration's behavior in the Abrego Garcia case may have led to the resignation of Ben Schrader, the chief of the criminal division of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Nashville. Sources briefed on Schrader's decision told ABC News that Schrader's resignation was prompted by concerns that the case against Abrego Garcia was being pursued for political reasons. Mr. Schrader did not directly address the speculation, but in a pointed LinkedIn post, he stated, quote, earlier today, after nearly 15 years as an assistant U.S. attorney, I resigned as chief of the criminal division at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Middle District of Tennessee. It has been an incredible privilege to serve as a prosecutor with the Department of Justice, where the only job description I've ever known...
Why did you resign? He should have made a stronger statement. Meh.
Is to do the right thing in the right way for the right reasons. So yet again, a career prosecutor with the DOJ resigned rather than move forward with these criminal charges. So I think at this point we can move from being skeptical about the government's charges against Abrego Garcia to just assuming that they're BS. But still, at least this time he's getting due process. A jury will decide whether the charges against him actually stand up in a criminal court. But already there appear to be some factual disputes in the government's findings, including inconsistent statements about whether Abrego Garcia told Tennessee police that he was coming from Missouri or Texas. None of these supposed witnesses mentioned in the indictment are named. Many of them appear to be convicted criminals who may have had incentives to be jailhouse informants. And an ABC News report indicates that one of the informants is currently serving a sentence in Alabama for illegally re-entering the United States. All these factors will have to be considered by an actual jury, and all these witnesses will have to be available for cross-examination and scrutiny. Though, as Abrego Garcia's attorney has pointed out, this still isn't true justice because, quote, true justice means the chance to defend yourself before you're punished, not after. Meanwhile, President Trump has claimed that he thinks the administration has, quote, a very easy case against Abrego Garcia, which sort of raises the question, if it was so easy, why not prosecute him earlier instead of making the politically controversial and unconstitutional decision to whisk him off to a torture prison without due process? And for the time being, the case before Judge Zenas is still alive. The plaintiffs have asked the judge to continue to hold on to her jurisdiction over the case, to order discovery against the Trump administration, and to consider their motion for sanctions. And regardless of the outcome of Abrego Garcia's criminal trial and civil case, the constitutional problems still remain because dozens of other men are still being held in the Salvadoran torture prison without trial or recourse. As Representative Jamie Raskin pointed out, quote, they obviously want to make this about whether or not he ends up being a good guy or a bad guy, but it's not a moral question. It's a legal question. It's a constitutional question of whether the government can pick people up and take them out of the country.
This is towards the end of Bondi's announcement where she finishes what the grand jury found and then went into the hearsay.
The defendant abused undocumented alien females, according to co-conspirators, who were under his control while transporting them throughout our country.
Why would you say something like this? Like, yeah, talk about prejudicial. why would you say something like this, even if that was in the indictment? I don't know how proper it is to announce stuff like this, even if it was in the indictment, unless you're just reading the indictment down, maybe. But this wasn't even included in the indictment. Why the fuck would she say this? It's insanely improper.
This defendant trafficked firearms and narcotics throughout our country on multiple occasions. They were using vehicles, SUVs, with added seats in the back, floors that had been ripped out, guns, narcotics, children, women.
This was in the indictment, at least.
MS-13 members. That is what the grand jury found. A co-conspirator alleged that the defendant solicited nude.
A grand jury, to be clear, a grand jury is basically what you're using for a charging document here. The grand jury only has to believe that there is probable cause, which is one of the lowest standards of evidence. That's what you need to arrest somebody. It's just probable cause, not anything else.
Photographs and videos of a minor. A co-conspirator.
This was not in the indictment either, so I don't know why she's going off on this.
A co-conspirator alleged that the defendant solicited nude photographs and videos of a minor. A co-conspirator also alleges the defendant played a role in the murder of a rival gang member's mother. These facts demonstrate Abrego Garcia is a danger to our community. We want to thank the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, our state and local partners, our acting U.S. Attorney Robert McGuire, and prosecutors from the Joint Task Force, Vulcan. Questions?
Attorney General.
This was 6 days ago, but...
The traffic stop that we've seen video of from Tennessee, where Abrego Garcia was first identified by the local authorities. At the time, the Homeland Security Department declined to take custody of him. What has happened in between that time and in between the time that the government has been arguing that he was not returnable from El Salvador? What has happened since in this investigation that brought you here?
Yes, the question was in 2021, there was the traffic stop. And what has changed since then? What has changed is Donald Trump is now president of the United States and our borders are again secure. And thanks to the bright light that has been shined on Abrego Garcia, this investigation continued with actually amazing police work. And we were able to track this case and stop this international smuggling ring from continuing.
These were recently found facts, right?
Isn't like every illegal smuggling ring going to be international to some extent? Otherwise, it wouldn't be illegal immigrants, right?
Recently found facts.
At that point, can you just explain when this investigation was opened? The investigation in Tennessee, can you say when that investigation was opened?
Well, the grand jury indicted on May 21st.
You're not answering any question, but okay.
This investigation has been ongoing.
No, okay.
It's been hotly debated here in Washington. In your mind, does this resolve that issue in terms of his deportation? And should this be seen in any way as compliant with the judge's order to return him to the U.S. and the Supreme Court ruling that the U.S. government should facilitate return?
There's a big difference between what the state of play was before the indictment and after the indictment. And so the reason why he is back and was returned was because of an arrest warrant, which was presented to the government in El Salvador. So there's a big difference there. As far as whether it makes the ongoing...
Oh, so you could always bring him back. That's good to know. We said that in the very beginning, but okay.
Litigation in Maryland moot? I would think so, but we don't know that. This, he just landed today.
Jake, CBS.
I just want to confirm what you said earlier, that you're intending to prosecute him and keep him in an American prison if he's found guilty, and then would remove him after his sentence is over.
Correct. Yes, he will be prosecuted in our country, sentenced in our country if convicted, and then returned after completion of his sentence.
Last one, Sadie, Wall Street Journal.
Okay. I had two. One's on topic, one's off topic. Maybe I misunderstood you, but you were mentioning, that he had some involvement in a murder, or was connected to groups that had, involved in this other smuggling ring. But to be clear, the only charges he's facing right now are the human smuggling charges, just that's the one offense. But the other things that you have talked about are not actually in the indictment?
No, co-conspirators allege that, and we were clear to say that. He's charged with, it's not only very serious charges of alien smuggling.
Why are you bringing up what co-conspirators said, you stupid fucking piece of shit?
And again, there were children involved in that. Human trafficking, not only in our country, but in our world, is very, very real. It's very dangerous. And as you saw recently in Virginia, the arrest we made of the MS-13 member, unrelated to this, we learned at that press conference, that's where they bring young children into our country and they start grooming them at middle school age to become MS-13 full-fledged members, commit violent crimes throughout our country. It is highly organized. It is very dangerous. And they are living throughout our country, but no more, because they are being arrested, they are being prosecuted and being convicted and deported when appropriate.
I feel like there should be a different, I feel like we need two different words for shipping around illegal aliens, because when somebody says trafficking, at least in my mind, I associate trafficking with against somebody's will, like this person's being trafficked. But I think legally and colloquially, well, this admin, like if I were to be in Mexico and I'm a Mexican, I'm like, I want to illegally immigrate to the US, I sell a bunch of shit and I pay some dude who's like, can you ship me over the border? Like, let's fucking do it. And then I do it. And I'm like consenting the whole time. I'm paying some guy and doing it. I'm also being like trafficked, I think. People still consider that trafficking. I don't know. It feels like kind of a weird conflation of Well, it's not even a conflation. I think that you can use the same word for both, but I mean, it feels different, right? I don't know.
That's all for today. Thank you.